I hate lying. In my experience, it only ever leads to more dire consequences. Even if there were no conceivable way of the other person finding out, the law of sod states that they would. If I wanted to be able to say something to sound impressive, I'd go out of my way to make it true to start with. Sometimes, though, things just are. You can't do anything about them. Some things you may be ashamed of, and some you just want to keep private for your own sake. To some extent, I'm an open book. I have no dignity left, so what's the use in hiding anything? But sometimes even I'm smart enough to realise that certain things I should probably keep to myself. So I've developed some clever ways of dodging questions, which I'll cover in this video. I've applied these to questions with discrete responses, but most of them work for open questions, and it's usually actually much easier for these. For closed questions, there are 3 reasons why I'd want to lie. Because I want someone to think the opposite, or a different answer is true. Because I don't want someone to know about something either way. Or I don't mind them speculating or even knowing, but I just don't want to say it myself. Number 1. The rude technique. This is one of the easiest techniques to implement, but you need a specific context for it to work. I mean, I guess you could use it anywhere, as long as you don't mind putting friends or even your job on the line. It's very simple. If someone you hate or you're never going to see again asks you a personal question, simply, dismiss them. Are you a virgin? Fuck off. Although, if you've seen my other videos, you'll know I don't exactly have an aversion to swearing. I really hate this technique. 2 reasons. Firstly, sometimes this is pretty much like saying the truthful answer. I saw you and Zach talking. Do you like him? Bugger off. Well, that just means yes. Secondly, unless you're already known and accepted as the blunt friend, you probably don't want to respond like this unless you're happy to burn bridges. The problem being, you need a pretty good gauge of whether you may see someone again. It's a smaller world than you may realise. But, in order to cut a conversation short with no regard for consequences, this is the one to go for. Number 2. What do you think? This is another incredibly simple technique, which I definitely prefer to the previous one, but it doesn't cater to every type of question and person asking. Are you straight? What do you think? Be sure to sound really fed up when you respond. You need to make them feel stupid for asking. A thing to note is that although this avoids a proper conversation and saying anything explicit, it will most likely cement what the person thought initially, so if you don't want this, this isn't for you. To try and combat this, you can embellish it by visually implying one way or the other in your response, whether your intention is to avoid the conversation or to actually mislead them. I know what you're thinking. Hold on a second, Fran. What do you think is a question? What if they answer it? Don't worry, I've got that accounted for. If they're thick enough to answer, you need to reply with a mildly surprised, Are you a virgin? What do you think? Yes. So, are you? They should get the hint by this point that you're avoiding the question, but if they're still a nosy prick, then you should adopt an additional technique. Number 3. The disinterest technique. Just act completely uninterested. As far as they're concerned, you're above the whole conversation. Are you a virgin? Why does that matter? Number 4. The visual technique. This one's great if you don't mind an awkward silence. The beauty is, by saying nothing, you don't implicate yourself at all. There are 4 classic faces. The really face. This one is very similar to the what do you think technique, but more concise. The mildly shocked face. If this doesn't make them retract the question, it's either not too personal, or they're incredibly ignorant. The disgusted face. You need to show how much you pity them for prying when it's none of their business. The insulted face. This works best for heavily inappropriate questions, especially ones where you have the last say as to whether it's offensive or not, because you have more passes than they do. The goal of all of these is for them to retract the question. Be warned, this technique doesn't work with computer scientists, because they don't understand social cues. Actually, I'm not sure any of this video would work with them. Oh well, simple solution. Don't talk to them in the first place. Number 5. The diversion technique, or changing the subject. This method's perfect if someone's trying to be sneaky by not asking direct questions. This isn't for everyone, but if you're good at it, it can be perfect, as people may not even suspect there's anything amiss.
Who was the weirdest guy you guys have slept with? One guy was really desperate to do it outside, but I completely refused.
That reminds me of something hilarious. The first time my mate brought someone home, the two of them were so horny they couldn't wait, so he gave him a handy outside Screwfix. Sometimes, you may even be lucky enough for them to change the subject for you. When I was in year 12, I got in trouble for the saddest reason you could possibly imagine. Doing a Rubik's Cube in class. I absolutely panicked, but I was lucky enough that the teacher accidentally threw me a line.
If I recall correctly, Miss Stevens was telling me about you being like this. Is it difficult having ADHD?
I find it very difficult to concentrate, so it takes me a long time to do things and I get distracted. And that's not great. I then proceeded to ask him about concentration techniques in order to change the subject. Miss Stevens told him I had learning difficulties. I had slow processing. She never mentioned ADHD. But I was not going to correct him. In hindsight, it honestly wouldn't surprise me if I do have ADHD, but if I tried for a diagnosis now, I'd only get one once uni's over, so there's no point. Also, everyone seems to have it these days, and they treat it like a personality trait, so I just can't be asked. Anyway, he left me completely off the hook. Arguably what I did in the first place wasn't that bad, but he was the head of sixth form, so there definitely would have been consequences if I didn't say these things. Number 6. Flirting. One of my favourites. If you have no shame, this is for you. You can shut down a conversation with 6 simple words. Are you a virgin? Are you coming on to me? I need to emphasise, you need to act jokingly turned on, not offended. This works even better with people of the same gender, because they'll feel like their sexuality is being questioned, and for some reason, people seem to be quite proud of being straight. What was your salary last year? Are you coming on to me? What? Honestly, I actually think this works even better when the context makes no sense. Of course, there is one way this can backfire. How big is your mouth?
Are you coming on to me?
Maybe I am. If you want my advice, might as well just seize the opportunity. Number 7. Wordplay. There's nothing like wordplay to make people believe a lie without even lying. The key is to heavily imply something, just below the line of saying it explicitly, but by telling the truth.
Are you a virgin?
My housemates would be able to answer that for me, given how thin the walls are in my house. You can also answer a slightly different question and hope they don't notice. Do you think Maya's fit? Her mom is. If you're bad at thinking of these things on the spot, it doesn't hurt to have some in the bag for questions you anticipate being asked. Obviously, this won't work if you know people who like to be creative with the things they ask.
Who's the fittest person in our halls who lives in a room with a prime number?
Number 8. Passing the buck. Incredibly simple. Pick an easy target, then go. Have you ever watched incest porn? Pfft, I'm not Fran. Hey! Number 9. The secret technique. The secret technique? What could that be? Lie.
What? The whole point of this video is how not to lie. Clickbait.
Okay, think what you want, but I had to add this in, because it's not as simple as just lying. Sometimes, like when you're in trouble at school, it's better just to explicitly lie, especially when it can't be proven. On the rare occasion when I do lie, I adopt one of 2 techniques. 9A. The trust technique. I could probably also call this the psychopath technique, but I reckon if you use it for minor things, there's no harm. Here's the key. You have to be truthful for a really long time so that people won't expect you to lie. When I was little, I farted all the time, but when I did, I confidently admitted it. People weren't usually thrilled, but I don't think they minded as much as I thought at the time. Anyway, this constant honesty meant that people then believed me if I said it wasn't me. Don't worry, I was above blaming anyone else, but this felt like an incredible power. Unfortunately, I guess, I quickly became an expert at holding it in, so I didn't need to use this power that much, but it was useful to have in the bag. 9b. The fake admission. Explicitly lying is risky. People will be suspicious. This is why I love this technique. If you're anything like I was, you've been in a situation where a teacher implies that they know you've done something wrong. In a lot of cases, though, they don't actually know. They just want a confession to make their job easier. Of course, you could say you did nothing, but this isn't very believable. The smart thing is to say you've done something bad.
What? Why would you do that?
Here's the trick. You say you've done something bad, but not as bad as what you've actually done. Bonus points if you can make it fine within the school rules. I swear I didn't throw that chair. Okay, I'll admit. I threw my ruler in the air and it landed on the light, so I put the chair on the desk to get it back. I realize that's dangerous and I won't do it again. Teachers will usually be so pleased with your admission of guilt that they won't question the logic of what you've said, and will probably drop the subject. Number 10. My favourite technique. Sarcasm. In my experience, this is the most effective technique, because essentially, it's telling the flat-out truth, but with such an intonation that people will think the complete opposite.
Have you shagged anyone?
Nah, I'm a virgin. If people question you on another occasion, you can say, "What? I told you before." If you can master all of these techniques, congratulations, you're now eligible to be a British politician. Now, as I was saying earlier, though these responses all usually end the conversation, only some will make people think the opposite of the truth, and only some will make them have no idea. At the age of 19, there's stigma around being a virgin, and around not being a virgin. Thanks for that, society. Anyway, if someone has an inclination whether you are, and asks, what will each technique have them thinking afterwards? In my opinion, no outcome is all round better than the others, because different things are better in different situations. Sometimes you'll want to be mysterious, and sometimes you'll simply want to fit in. So which technique is the best? The answer? None of them. They're not one size fits all, so you'll need to use your best snap judgment in the situation. In addition, you'll want to chop and change them, switch them around a bit, so people don't grow suspicious that your behaviour follows a pattern. With all this said, how did I actually react? Funnily enough, with the blatant truth.
Are you a virgin?
Yeah. Well, at least I hope so. Last week, given where I woke up, I wasn't sure, but I was too afraid to ask. That sure as hell made them change the subject. Can't say 14-year-old Fran will be happy with me for saying this, but if you enjoyed this, remember to like, and if you enjoy ballsy humour, taking the piss out of things, or even just watching someone's life fall apart, don't forget to subscribe.